What's going on, guys? I got my girl Darcy Clark in the studio today.
What up?
What up, Darcy? Darcy, how we doing today?
I'm feeling great. I'm honored to be on the podcast.
There you go. Love it. Well, guys, I'm excited to have kind of a very specific conversation with Darcy today, kind of in lieu of making big decisions. I know it's like college graduation, high school graduation time too, so a lot of people are making decisions, trying to figure out like what's my next step in life. Where do I need to work? Where do I need to go next? Where do I want to move? All that stuff. And so, Darcy, I felt like you were kind of a solid girl to talk about this topic today. And so, just to start off, kind of give a background, just a kind of a cliff note of like your job journey and just your journey in general when it comes to that.
Okay, and the best way I can, here's a Sparks Notes edition. I grew up in Georgia. I went to elementary school there. We moved over to Texas.
Yeah, we're at in Georgia, by the way.
We were in Dalton, Georgia, so that's carpet capital. So shout out carpet below us, probably from Dalton, Georgia.
The great Dalton, Georgia.
Great Dalton, Georgia. And then we moved to Katy, Texas. Shout out Katy, Texas.
Yeah.
I started junior high here. Went to high school at Tompkins. Go Falcons, FP 1440. I think we still say that, right?
Probably not.
Okay, great. Anyways, and then went to Texas A&M as one does growing up in Texas.
Yep.
Lots of Aggies, very influenced. And like I said, Cliff's Notes version.
Yeah.
Wanted to go far, ended up going to Texas A&M. Texas A&M, that lasted for 2 years.
Yeah.
A hard but stretching 2 years. Sophomore year was incredible. And then...
And what made sophomore year incredible? What made it kind of change up?
The change up was realizing that I didn't have to be anything other than myself to have friends and to find community and to step into what God had for me. Like, I was most usable by God when I was just 100% me.
Yeah.
And so once I stepped into that my sophomore year and away from following culture, following the crowd, the party scene, and just feeling like I had to fit these images and just stepped into the image that God created me in, I really began to find community. I began to get to impact people's lives by inviting them into my life, into my story, and telling them about that.
Wow. And so obviously that led to a great sophomore year at A&M. And so after A&M, where did you go? What was the next move after that?
Yeah, after my sophomore year, I packed up that April, finished up finals online, shout out COVID.
Yeah.
Went off to Cleveland, Tennessee, where I did a residency program a couple months in, made it a full-time gig.
So I want to talk about that a little bit. So did you feel a calling to full-time ministry early on? Did you feel called like even before that point, or was it just something like an opportunity that you thought, this sounds cool, I could jive with this church work thing? How did you end up going into full-time ministry?
Absolutely. When I was in middle school, I remember receiving a very specific calling on my life to step into ministry, but obviously ministry isn't everything, but ministry vocationally. And not just ministry vocationally, but involving girls.
Yeah.
Girls ministry, women's ministry specifically. So as a sophomore in college, I'm about to go off to Cleveland, Tennessee. And one of the persons I was connected with out there was like, what exactly do you want to do? And I just remember before I had answered that question, I kind of just signed up to go out there for media ministry, right? And then a couple weeks before, right at 2 weeks before I was packed to move to drive off to Tennessee, I said, you know what? I actually feel a calling to do women's ministry, but for whatever reason, I'm still passionate about media. So I don't know how this is all going to play out, how it's going to factor in.
And so how long were you in Tennessee for?
I was in Tennessee for 6 months. So from May to November.
Yeah. And you're like 19 at this time? Like how old were you?
At this time, I was 20.
Which is crazy, right? A crazy jump to make for a 20-year-old moving from Texas to Tennessee. And so 19, 20 years old, you moved to Tennessee, but 6 months, to be honest, 6 months is kind of a short tenure at a certain place, which is the story of a lot of people, right? They get somewhere and I'm not saying this is your story, but maybe they get there and they realize like, maybe this isn't what I thought, or maybe there's some difficulties that go along with this that I did not anticipate. Was it any of that for you? Like, why was it 6 months? Because obviously you're in Texas now. So what was the reason for that?
Right. Kind of crazy. So I'm out there, started with the residency, ended up getting to be one of the first ministers that's a girl on staff and jump in with one of my good friends there too. And I was the high school girls minister, full-time gig. I had a plan to be there for a really long time. I mean, I picked the place.
Which is crazy because if you're a girl listening to this right now, it's dream job. If you want to go into ministry, it's hard to find. If you're a young lady listening, it's kind of hard to find a full-time gig. So full-time gig, a real deal job, not internship, not, part-time, like real deal career. And so you're there. And then what happened after this?
I'm there. We're about 5 to 6 months deep and everything's awesome. But then just like my time alone with the Lord began to shift. And there was this longing for home. And come to find out, I get homesick. Like, I'm severely homesick. I miss my people here, specifically my parents.
Did you anticipate it being as difficult as it was as far as the homesickness went? Did you ever fear that? Like, I'm moving kind of far. Like, this may be hard. Did you ever think about that going into it or what?
No, not going into it. And things were going awesome. Like, we had a scheduled way of when I would get to see them and talks on the phone. I had even family that lived there, but there was actually a wreck that kind of changed everything for me and how I felt and the way that I live my life.
Mm-hmm. And so when did this wreck take place? After Tennessee, before Tennessee, or what?
This wreck took place in the summer while I was in Tennessee. I was still a resident at the time.
A car wreck, I assume.
A car wreck. We had flipped upside down into a river, and I was underwater.
Oh my God! So tell us a little bit more about that. So, how long were you in Tennessee at this point?
I'm about 3 months into being in Tennessee.
Okay, and so what happens? You just is it you and a friend? Like, what transpired here?
I'm with a friend group, and you're trying to make community, be friends with all the people, and we're just having a game night. And this game night began into tag kind of all over the place, all over the city. And we're down this windy gravel road. We did one part of the game and we're like, okay, let's throw the car in reverse. We did. And the car flipped upside down, went nose down into the river. And to just speed up the story, I remember people getting to the scene just to check on us, make sure we were okay. And they said, who do you have that can come and give you a hug? And I thought about that. And I was like, wow, I don't really have anyone here while I'm doing ministry with that I feel like would want to come and do that.
Yeah. And because it sounds like physically you were fine for the most part, but emotionally you weren't at this point.
Totally.
And so that was a wake-up call for you, realizing, oh my gosh, I am 20 hours, 15 hours away from my home, from the family that I've known, all my life growing up with. What happens after that? What are kind of the feelings you start to wrestle with? What transpires afterward?
I think after that, there were seeds planted throughout that point in time in the summer, all the way up till November, that the Lord slowly slipped in, just like using homesickness as a vehicle to bring me back so that I could have this season that I'm in right now, that I've been in, of recharging, getting to be with community and getting to help others build community.
Yeah. And so you eventually leave Tennessee, obviously, in 6 months. Was that hard? Like, finally making the decision to leave after 6 months, did it come easy, or was it like, how did those conversations go? Was it embarrassing, hard for you? Like, what was that?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was easily one of the hardest decisions that I had to make because nothing went wrong. It was the most wonderful, most incredible job. But I just remember so clearly the Lord being like, no, like, I really need you to go back. So like, I'm going to allow this homesickness. Like, right now, we're not going to overcome it. I'm going to allow it so that you can feel it because I need you home. And I felt such a strong call to come and to sit and be home with my people. And I was like, Lord, why would you have me come sit and be at home, near my parents and near my brother? Like, what purpose in the future is this going to serve? So
when you say God's call, what practically did you feel? Were there, because I think can be ambiguous for a lot of people, because I have, interesting thoughts and stances on like God's call, that, God's call is more broad than it is specific at certain times. Obviously there's practical implications in our life, but, I think God gives us a lot of leeway to choose careers, vocations, jobs, and things like that. And so for you, when it comes to God's call, what were some of the things that you were picking up on that you saw as signs or preemptings to move back home, as you mentioned?
Absolutely. I think just including him in the process of the whole decision of like, Lord, do I buy into this? Like, do I go home? Do I quit this job? Do I resign from something that's been such a dream of mine that you've passioned and purposed me with to go home? Like, I thought this was supposed to be a forever thing. So slowly through just time with him, which is really all times of the day if you invite him into it, I just began to not feel at peace. I was like, I have to step out. Like, I'm not at peace.
Like a certain anxiety about it, or what?
I was just so physically homesick. So I was to the level of homesickness where it actually made me sick.
Wow. Like physically sick.
Physically sick.
And that's okay. So, and I want to get your thought on this, because there's a balance there of following God's call, quote, and then really using God as an excuse to make ourselves feel better about leaving a situation that we could have stayed in or could not have stayed in and had the freedom to do it. But we ascribe it to maybe Jesus to make us feel better. Not saying you did it, but I think there's a lot of that. A lot of saying, oh, I feel like God is wanting me to leave, or whatever that may be. I feel like God wants me to break up with you. I feel like God wants me to do these things. How do you go about discerning a desire and God's call? What are some things that like that you would involve? Like, is it prayer? Is it like lining things up with scripture? Is it like, how do you think someone would ever ascribe the balance there?
I love that you asked that. So I think to ascribe that balance, something that resonated with me a lot in that season really stemmed from the concept of this verse, John 8, verse 54. Jesus replied, "If I glorify myself, my glory means nothing." And I think when we go about making decisions in life, if the root of that decision is self-glorification, you've got to just estimate, okay, there's future destruction here. But if the root of your decision is, you know what, I want to expand heaven, I want him to be glorified through this, then so be it, and he will. He invites us into victory. So in any season where we're separate, or in any decision where we're separate from making that decision with him, we're also going to be separate from that end result of victory in that.
Yeah, and I think it's really good. I love what you said there, right? Inevitably, we have to be able to divide what we want from what betters the kingdom. And in any decision, if the situation is benefiting us more than the kingdom, then it's probably showcases it may be a selfish decision.
Absolutely.
If it's purely down to, well, I could go, let's think careers, right? Just because we're on that, I could go make more money over here and have more flexibility over here, and maybe my significant others over here. Okay, and it's okay to move. Like, you can move if you want to. God gives us that freedom, but we shouldn't attribute it to the fact that God is calling me. But yet, on the flip side, if the move does not benefit you and maybe is a detriment to you personally, but benefits the kingdom, I think that's when we can distinguish, like, okay, this is maybe God's call here. Like, this preempting to move towards something that is uncomfortable for me and doesn't really better me practically right now, I think that's a great way to dissuade, okay, this may be God. Like, this doesn't make sense on the exterior, but it makes sense in the kingdom and the spiritual realm. So for that matter, maybe this is what I need to do. So either way, you felt the call. You felt a preempting to leave Tennessee, to go back to Texas, to go where? Or was it just to leave Tennessee? Like, what was that?
To go back to Texas, and I guess to expand a little bit more on that feeling of homesickness, but I was at such a level of exhaustion from all the feelings I was feeling of being far from my people, things not going according to the plan that I initially thought, because granted, I'm not perfect. I got there and I was like, maybe this will be forever. And so once I got to that level, I was like, I need to step out so something new can come in and take root here. And I need to go home, be with my people. God's still going to use me. He's still going to do something in my life there in Texas. But I felt such a peace about it. In fact, such a peace that I packed up, got the ball rolling, and I was back here in November. And it was the smoothest transition out of there. And just some of the most wonderful conversations I had where I was like, you know what? I was obedient in the call to go. That initially felt like a test. Like, Darcy, will you be obedient when like all the norms of culture say finish college in 4 years, don't take on a full-time job in ministry? And I
love that so much, because people are so busy trying to walk other people's path that they get off their own. And it's like, well, I need to go to college for 4 years, or I need to get this job when I'm 22 or when I'm 23. I need to go to grad school because everybody in my family went to grad school. I need to be an engineer because everybody in my family is an engineer, and I've seen them be successful in that regard. we should always be sensitive to God's specific purpose in our life and not necessarily get so inundated and infatuated with what God is doing in other people's lives, because we are not them. We're uniquely built, fashioned in the image of God and for purposes unique to us, and we should always fall in line with that. So I love that. I love how you battle those pressures properly in that season. So continue, though. So you're battling those pressures. You're trying to deal with, okay, everybody else did this, but I kind of want to do this. Like, what transpired?
Yeah, I mean, battling all those pressures, and I just knew that I didn't have to follow the pattern of the world or the pattern of culture. Granted, college is an incredible thing. I do plan to finish, but I followed that homesickness to come home, and being home, then, the decision of, okay, well, do I go back to Texas A&M? What does this look like? And, that was a huge decision that I had to make on, well, what do I do?
Mm-hmm. So what did you do?
Obviously, I'm not currently still at Texas A&M. I probably wouldn't have made it to the podcast right now. Who knows?
Gig 'em Aggies.
Gig 'em Aggies. Yes, so I didn't choose to go back to Texas A&M. I followed up with an asynchronous semester. Mm-hmm. Shout out COVID for making all the things like that possible.
Yeah.
And did school online this past semester. Had a season where I just got to recharge and be with family. Like, that's really what my heart was. My heart was people, because I think at the end of the day, for my life, and I know for so many others, you could probably also agree that relationships are just the most important thing.
Oh, absolutely. More important than any job, any amount of money that you make, anything like that. Relationships are the best equity we can ever acquire in this world. So
absolutely. And it's the best way where you can tangibly see God's love. So I remember being home November, and I was just like, Lord, what do you want me to do in this season? And some of you are probably like, okay, what does that actually look like to ask God these questions? But I'll just like journal it out, Nick. Like, I'll just write, Lord, what do you want from me? What do you want to have me do? And I'll just go about it. And there's such a peace when you are walking with God. Like, he is not going to leave you in a state of confusion. He might allow a test to come your way or a trial season to come your way, but he's not a God of confusion or instigating confusion. So I think when you do go about making decisions of, okay, what do I do now with this chunk of time? I have a whole future ahead of me that for me personally, I didn't know what it looked like. And I just remember very, very specifically, go be with people. Like, go be with your people.
That's so good, because a lot of us get so captivated with, what does God want me to do for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 30 years of my life? And in reality, just be consumed with what God wants you to do right now. Do what you're called to do right now, and then he will determine and figure out the rest of your steps down the road. But just do what God is calling you to do right now. And I think we can, complicate it so much when it's so simple. Just be obedient to what God has called you to in this moment. So that's so interesting. So we called you to relationships and things like that, but obviously, there's transition to come. What did that look like for you?
The transition to come. I don't know exactly what transition you're talking about. I know we're going to get there.
As far as job-wise, yeah.
As far as job-wise. Well, I dove into asynchronous school. People were asking, hey, what are you planning on doing? Da-da-da. And so I had just made a tangible plan that I thought was good, not really sought out too much counsel. I was just like, you know what? I know this will please the ears of people around me. So I made the plan. I'm going to go to University of Houston. I'm going to live in this place, and I'm going to do this. That was the thing that I could so grab on. But what's interesting, going back to the situation about peace, is like, I just still felt no peace about it. No matter how good or how wise the decision seemed in the ears of others around me, I still had no peace about it. And so what I have to say about like making plans for yourself is like, hold on to it with a loose grip so you can allow God to do the miraculous through your story. Like, when our yes is on the table and we're obedient and we're willing to go places, he can just do crazy things for us. For example, I'm 2 weeks back to being home. I had just gotten back from Tennessee. I love girls ministry. I love media. I love all of the things. I love to share on social media. And I get reached out to by the Instagram of Live Original.
Mm-hmm. And what is Live Original?
Live Original is a ministry founded by Sadie Robertson Huff. And it's just a global ministry of women. Her ministering to women. There are messages, podcast recordings, books, like you name it. We're like actually in the process of planning a conference right now. Just so many cool things. Go check it out. But I'm 2 weeks back into being home, being obedient to that so-and-so call to come home, him using my homesickness. And I think when we're obedient to God with the small things, he's going to even grant the large things. So something that had been a desire of my heart is to just get to be an influence on media in any capacity. And anyone can. Mm-hmm. They reach out and they say, hey, will you be an ambassador for us? A little longer message than that. And I jump back in and I'm like, man, let me pray on this. And, isn't just so much peace. I was like, yes, I'm in. Absolutely. And so began that season of just being an ambassador for them, which began in January.
Wow. And so ambassador obviously is not paid. It's just, brand ambassador, stuff like that, more social media type vibe, but it's not paid.
Practically, it's like serving your local church.
Yeah, yeah.
But serving
but not a career at this point, obviously.
Right. Not a career.
And so, but did you ever hope for it to be a career? Like, what was the vibe?
I definitely think it was a shot in the dark at the time. I was like, Lord, I don't know. I remember people would ask, what does your future look like? And when I came to the decision of like, okay, it's not University of Houston. It's not living in that specific place I thought I was going to live. I candidly gave people the answer, I don't know. Like there was a season where I told you and Danielle, I don't know what my future looks like.
Mm-hmm. And so eventually get to the point where you start to have an idea as to at least what the short-term future is going to look like. And so talk about that. How did you get to that point?
For the short-term future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as far as career-wise.
Okay, career-wise?
Because January comes around and then you're an ambassador for Live Original, but not a career situation at this point. So, obviously I know you end up at least getting hired by them. So how did that end up coming about?
I had a very loose plan to go to college and to live with a good friend in the Houston area. Obviously held that with such a loose grip, as I've been mentioning. And along the several months of me being home, February, I went out for an ambassador retreat that they hosted us for. Mm-hmm. Such an incredible time, incredible opportunity. I remember driving to that, just having such a weird peace of like, okay, I think I'm going to do this drive again. Yeah. Like, I really think I'm going to see these people again. I went into that weekend not knowing anybody. I'd never met them face to face, maybe a couple at Passion, but in that specific setting, that was the first time I really got to soak and hang out with the team, hang out with the other ambassadors. And oddly enough, by the time I got there and by the time I left, the people that I had made the deepest connections with, little to my knowledge that I now know they all are from Monroe, Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And like, that's only God, because we don't wander around with like where we're from, like floating above our head. And so that was just such a cool thing. And I remember being there too at that ambassador retreat, no clue what my future looked like. And we're being talked to about you are anointed and God is going to do something through your life, and your obedience to him, like he will move and he will do something. He will use your story. And I obviously, for me, didn't know what that looked like. I kind of disagreed. I was like, you know what? That's great to hear, but I disagree. Like there's nothing going on here. I don't know how he's using all the things from my past for my future and just working it all out. I don't know how he's going to do it. There's so many things I'm passionate about that just don't even touch each other. You have girls ministry, you have marketing, you have social media, you have all these different categories that I never thought could intersect with each other. But I remember being there in that room, we would worship, and I just felt such a peace of like, I am going to see this later. But when you hear that or when you think that, that's such a shot in the dark for a dream like that.
Yeah. And so obviously it's a shot in the dark. It's kind of a long shot, but you'll find out, and you guys will find out that what looks like a long shot by yourself is often very attainable with God. Not like a prosperity gospel way, like he's going to give you whatever you want, but you'll find that God will put you in positions and places in which you never thought possible for yourself. And so obviously that happens for you. with a full-time gig. How did that happen?
Right. So I get home. That kind of comes to a close. I'm still an ambassador. I'm walking out that season. And where we're at right now, maybe a month and a half ago, they posted to their social media 2 jobs. One that my future roommate got and one that I applied for. And it was for their photography and social media assistant. So I see that. I'm reading it. And then I just, like one does, went to pray on it. And I went to talk to my mom because right now I'm living with my parents. And I go to talk to her about it. And I'm like, hey, they posted this. And so we're reading it together. And it just felt like a letter to me. But I neglected that. I was like, I don't know. I'm not going to apply yet. Maybe I will. And so kind of then went into just like this long 2-week season from when they posted to then of just praying about it, seeing what I should do. Long story short, went ahead, applied, and just the ball kept rolling. I've never read a job application that felt like a letter to me. And all the things that I have been just passionate and purposed with, the Lord interconnected together. So like my encouragement for people wanting to step into what they feel called to do or are looking ahead to the future, don't dismiss or let go of passions you had growing up. He works it all out for his glory and your good. And it is just going to blow your mind, but only if you allow it. And if your yes is on the table for him to do whatever. Obviously, this job comes with a move. I've lived away before. You've heard my story where I wrestled with homesickness, but I remember months ago being at that retreat and being like, you know what, Lord, if you're going to send me anywhere again, I am okay with it being 5-ish hours away. But that's my max. And, we can't wager with God or anything, but it is so neat that, and it doesn't shock me at all, but he heard my desire in my heart to be in driving distance. If I want to go back in a day and see them, I can do that. I can have that peace of mind that if something happens, if I were to flip into a river again, hopefully not, I have people 5 hours away that I can drive and see. And he's given me this whole past season to just get to establish such a grand home base and recharge here with people like you and people that I'm in a small group with. And
which is so awesome. And you have, it will continue to have an incredible journey, and not just a job journey, but a journey with Jesus Christ, because, as we all know, and hopefully you guys listening know, making it is not a career. Making it is daily obedience for the glory of God. So Darcy, we're so thankful that you're on today. We appreciate you, and we know this is going to encourage and help out a ton of people.
Thanks for having me on the podcast, Nick.